my name is Sue Searle and I am your tutor for this evening. So I'm Principal Ecologist at Ecology Training UK. I've been an ecologist since 2003, and so I've got lots of experience of ecology. I started my ecological career as a career changer and was previously a nurse and a midwife, and decided that I didn't want to do that anymore and wanted to become something to do with wildlife. And after a while, it became apparent that I wanted to become an ecological consultant. So I went to university, did a BSc in biological sciences, came out of that realizing I wasn't going to get a job with the skills I got from that. But it did make me into a scientist, I guess. And then I did a postgraduate diploma, which is a master's without the project, up at Bristol University in ecology conservation and habitat management. And that was basically a training to become an ecological consultant. And after I did that course, I set up my first consultancy, which is Acorn Ecology, which ceased trading in 2019. And I was a full-time ecological consultant all that time, running Acorn Ecology. I now run Ecology Training UK because I really like training and teaching, so I decided that I would really like to do that more than anything else. And I do consultancy still, but I really love training, so I'm focusing more on that at the moment. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. So I guess you can tell that I probably do know a bit about consultancy, and I do know how to get into it and what you need to do. And actually my mission in life really is to get as many people to get into ecology or conservation as possible, because I think that nature and wildlife and the environment needs help, basically, and the more the merrier. The more we can get people out there passionate about wildlife, the better, I think. It's also a very growing discipline. There's a lot of jobs, a lot of new consultancies setting up. There's a lot of work for ecologists at the moment. So it's very, very good business to get into, and government policies are going much more towards green and sustainability and all that sort of thing. So I think it's going to keep getting better and better. So yeah, so I thought I would just put together a webinar that would help you to understand what I think are the key skills for becoming an ecological consultant. And there's some that are obvious and some that are less obvious. And the way I'm going to do it is I've got a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen in a minute, and I'm just going to go through some stuff and keep talking to you about the different things. But please do ask questions as we go along. So if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself, and then we can take the question, and we'll kind of move forward like that. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. And if you've got any other questions, then please either put them in the chat for later or ask me directly. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for a second. And the controls are covering up my menu. Right, there we go. Supposed to be trying to get, there we go, just me. It's not just me. If I put just me, it goes to Stephen. Right, okay, we'll do it like that. Okay, so key skills for ecological consultancy. So I'm a principal ecologist and I'm a full member of MCIEEM as well. And yeah, I've got lots of interesting things to share with you. So the first thing to say is that I have, on the next slide, if I can get it to work. Come on, it's being slow. So why do you need to have certain skills? The skills that I'm going to outline for you tonight why do you need to have these skills? And, you know, I'm going to let you know which ones I think that you need. Why do you need them? Obviously to get your CV noticed, because what you want to do is to get a job, and the first contact usually with a prospective employer is a piece of paper called a CV. So it's not you, it's not your personality, it's your piece of paper. And so your CV needs to look as good as possible and have as much relevant stuff on there as possible. And what you might find is that, you know, everybody in the room is going to be at different stages with this. So some people will be, you know, just at the beginning, maybe they're still at university, or they're, you know, trying to decide what to do. And other people might have a fair bit of experience, but don't really know how to become an ecologist. So everyone's going to be different. And you just need to bear in mind that if I go through all of these skills, that it doesn't mean that you can't get a job if you haven't got some of them. It just means that it's the sort of ultimate aim is to get these skills ready, or build on your skills as you go along. And ideally, obviously, you would want to be doing it in the job so that you actually are getting paid to do it. But obviously, the more skills and knowledge you have when you're applying for jobs, the more likely you are to get a job. I also think that having these key skills will help you become a better ecologist. So it's the skills really that make a good ecologist, and therefore these are things that you need to focus on. And I think when you know what to focus on, it makes it easier to decide maybe what training you need to do, or what experience you need to do, what books you need to be reading, and what research you need to be doing, things like that. And the key skills are also things that you build on. So you keep learning, you keep adding more detail to them. So I've got some students at the moment that are sort of okay at botany, and they're going to be working on their botany this summer and improving it. And then others are already good at botany. So I've asked them to crank it up a level and start learning Latin names and start, you know, progressing with their botany, because you can always get better. And then, of course, your key skills will help your career to progress as well. So that's the idea, is that I've identified these key skills, and with those, you will be able to get a job easier, and you'll become a better ecologist, and then you'll be able to progress your career as well. So I'm just going to summarize them, and then I'm going to go through each one in turn. So the top skill, I think, is driving, only because if you can't drive, then that could be a problem. But I'm going to go through all these in a minute. So I'll just say we've got driving, IT, I'm going to go into more detail about that, report writing, legislation, botany, phase 1, protected species knowledge and experience. So we're just going to go through these one at a time. So driving is an essential skill, really, and if you can't drive yet, then I would put that on top of your list to get that done, because basically, if you are an ecologist, you will be driving quite a bit. You'll be driving to remote sites that you can't get to any other way. You'll be, you know, driving to different parts of the country. Some consultancies will get you driving all over the country. I personally would rather work for a consultancy that works in a local area and doesn't expect you to drive a lot, but you know. So yeah, so driving is really essential, and I think most people wouldn't hire a non-driver. I've actually had people apply for jobs and they can't drive, and I just thought to myself, you look really good on CV, but you can't drive. How are you going to do the surveys exactly? Who's going to get you there? How are you going to actually go and do surveys? And they, you know, they just can't. So it's actually going to affect whether you get hired as well. So it's a really important thing. And just to let you know, you might also need to have your own car as well. So if you can drive but haven't got a car, you might be required to have your own car. There's not that many consultancies that give you a company car. So mostly you have to use your own car. You do get expenses, and they're quite generous expenses per mile rate. So, you know, it does pay for repairs and insurance and things like that. But yeah, just be aware that if you haven't got a car either, then you need to try and work that one out. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking about driving because I know it's not a really an ecological skill, but it is something that some people completely miss, and they think, well, I've got all this, I've got this degree and I've got this experience, and but I can't drive, and so I put it first. Okay. So IT, I do think that it's a good idea to have good IT skills, because you're going to be writing reports, you're going to be doing data analysis, you're going to be, producing maps and things like that. So I would expect people to be pretty competent at Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Publisher or some sort of drawing package, because that's what we use to create diagrams for our reports or our protected species licenses. We also use it for mapping. So we usually go and do a preliminary ecological appraisal as the first visit to a site, and then we do a map of the habitats that are there. So you have to have something you can draw with, because you don't want to put a hand-drawn map into a report if you want to look professional. So you need to know how to do drawing of a map. You also will use email all day and every day. I mean, I have mine on my phone now so that I can field emails while I'm out, and that might happen if you're busy, particularly in the summer. So making sure that you can use email competently and keep in touch with people. And then also you might need some social media awareness depending on the consultancy, but if it's a small consultancy, they might get you involved in social media. And maybe you need to just like take photos of yourself doing things, or write little stories or blogs or things like that. So it might be something that you would get involved in. And then there's some more advanced IT skills, which are things like bat sound analysis and GIS, digital mapping. And if you're going to be working with bats or in a consultancy that deals with bats, which is pretty much every consultancy, then there will be some scope for doing bat sound analysis. And so when we go out and do a bat survey, we take a recording device with us, and we record all the bats, and then we use those sonograms, or the digital recordings, we convert into sonograms, which we look at on our computer, and then we can work out which species of bat it is from the sound analysis, and that's quite a useful way of identifying species. So if you wanted to do bat sound analysis, I would recommend that you actually do a course on that, because it's quite a useful thing to learn. And sometimes your local bat group or local bat projects are looking for people to do bat sound analysis so you can get some practice. But if you've got bat sound analysis on your CV, then that's quite useful for people, because for every hour that you spend in the field recording, you might spend half an hour looking at the bat sounds when you get back. And sometimes we have to leave bat detectors out for months on end, and you get a lot of data, and then somebody has to sort it out and identify everything. So if you can show that you have bat sound analysis skills, then that goes a long way to help you getting a job. A lot of consultancies now are using GIS as mapping for mapping habitats and general mapping. There's some free software called QGIS, or QGIS, which you can practice on. But basically QGIS or GIS is a layer system where you add layers to the map, and you just create maps with data on them, so you can measure areas, and you can record what species you found on each layer and things like that. So it's quite a useful thing. I think a lot of consultancies now have GIS specialists, where they actually just hand the map over to a GIS specialist rather than the ecologist doing it. But in smaller consultancies, you might be expected to learn GIS mapping. So again, you would probably need to do a course for this. It's not that easy to teach yourself. And there are courses available. So yeah, have a look out for those. Okay. So another skill you'll need is report writing. And report writing, obviously, if you've done a degree or you've worked in any environment where you've had to write reports or write, summaries of things, then you'll probably be fine at report writing. So you need to be able to write clearly and concisely. So try and cut out the waffle if you can. And really, the client that's reading your report, so usually we get a project, so the client phones us up and they say, I need to convert my barn and I think I've got bats in it. And so then you go along and have a look and you see if you can find any bat droppings and any entrances and any bats and things like that. And then you write a report about what you found. That report doesn't want to be too waffly and go on too much. It needs to just tell the client what you've got and what has to happen next. So usually what has to happen next is they have to have further surveys done to clarify how many bats are there and exactly which species, and to check that it's not a maternity roost, for example. And then you would update your report with the final report and recommendations. So you have to include quite a lot of information. So you would be, like if you were doing a field instead of a barn, you would be collecting data about the habitats, about the species that are present. So it would be anything from birds, plants, insects, reptiles, anything that you see or you think could be there. So you collect a load of information in the field and then you have to put it together in the report. And we do use templates to structure our reports to make sure they're in a logical order. And MCIEEM, our professional body, has a sort of guidance on what headings that they would expect to see in an ecological report. And so what I recommend is, when you're doing reports, is to create your own template and then have certain things in there that are going to be in every report, and you just kind of fill in the blanks, so it's a lot easier to use then. For example, the legislation, you put it in your template, then you don't have to research it every time you do a report. And then you need to gather all the conclusions and recommendations and make sure that you clearly state what you want the client to do and what's going to happen on site. So it might be further surveys, it might be some sort of mitigation, some sort of enhancement of the site, those sorts of things. And obviously, knowing what to put in your conclusions and recommendations probably comes a little bit later when you're more experienced, because you don't really necessarily know what to say in that particular section, but you can write quite a big chunk of a report saying where the building was and what the surrounding habitat was and what the local nature reserves are, and things like that. And reports always include legislation as well. In fact, the legislation is the key thing that sort of is the reason why we do what we do, because we're dealing mainly with protected species and we're wanting to know which protected species are present, what they're protected against, and whether the thing that's going to happen on site, for example, a new housing development or a barn conversion, is it going to break the law, basically? And if it is, then you need to advise your client on what they need to do, and they might need to go through some sort of licensing. So legislation is something that you need to be very familiar with, and you need to understand so that you can give proper advice. So just to let you know that we do have a phase 1 and a preliminary ecological appraisal course in June in Hampshire if you want to learn how to write reports. So the PEA course is includes report writing and assessing sites. And also, I'm going to cover legislation in a minute, but all of our courses have some element of legislation in them so that you understand about the legislation of the particular species that you're learning about. Okay, so legislation, so as I've just said, all the surveys are governed by legislation, and you need to have a good knowledge of the current legislation. So legislation changes. We've just had a change since Brexit, so we've obviously just had to change the European legislation, where they basically crossed out everywhere it said Europe, they put Britain or England and Wales, and they changed a couple of things that were still linked to Europe. But you need to keep up to date with legislation, because you're the one that's advising your client. You're the one that is the expert that's being paid by your client to actually be up to date with all of this. So it's really useful to stay current, and that's one of the reasons why I recommend people become a member of MCIEEM, which is the Chartered Institute of Ecologists and Environmental Managers. And it's basically, they send out all sorts of newsletters and briefings and things like that to make sure that you are keeping up to date with everything. And then, of course, once we know the legislation, we've decided which species are on site, we need to be able to interpret what's going to happen on site and which species are going to be affected and how. And if they're present on site, so for example, if you've got dormice in the hedgerow, but the hedgerow is not going to be affected, you might just want to put some sort of buffer zone around the hedgerow so that they're not going to be disturbed, rather than having to go through licensing to allow them to do works. So there's quite a lot to know about legislation, and it took me ages to get to grips with legislation, and it really is an important thing, particularly if you want to start going for licenses for your surveys, if you want to get survey licenses, because one of the key things you need to know is the legislation, and you really need to be able to have it off pat. I've got a friend of mine who's been doing lots of bat surveys. He's done hundreds of hours of bat surveys, and he still hasn't got his license, because every time I assess him, I say, okay, the first thing I'm going to ask you is about legislation. And he can't tell me what bats are protected against and what piece of legislation. And I said, look, this is the thing that you stumble on every time I ask you these questions, and you still are not learning it. So make sure that you go on, well, all of our ecology and surveying courses cover legislation. We've also got a surveying for protected species course, which covers a lot of legislation. And we've also got a specific one for bat workers, a legislation for bat workers. Yeah, so it's really important that you start to get your head around legislation and trying to remember it, because if your client says, oh, what are bats protected against, and you'll have to sort of be able to rattle it off and say they're protected against killing, injuring and disturbing, they're protected against damage or destruction of their roost and obstruction of access to the roost, and be able to rattle that off and then make sense of it on site as well. And you also need to have an awareness of licensing for surveys and developments. So if you're going to be doing a survey that's disturbing a protected species, and it's considered to be a disturbing type of survey, like a dormouse nest tube survey, for example, or a great crested newt bottle trapping survey, then you will need to have a license, a survey license for that. And actually the next webinar that I'm going to do on the 6th of April is going to be about working towards your license, your different survey licenses. But also, if there's a development, you need to be aware that you need to have a license in certain situations. So for example, I've got 5 protected species license projects on the go at the moment. One was a farmhouse where they wanted to demolish the old house and build a new house. And so we had to put in place a license for that, because that would be damaging or destroying a bat roost, because it was a bat roost. We had to create a new bat roost, and we had to supervise roof removal and things like that under license. So if you're doing a development that involves disturbing a protected species like a bat, a dormouse, an otter, a badger, and some of the reptiles, then you will need to do a development license, and that's a whole different process again, which is usually for people, well, you have to have a survey license to be able to write a license, and it's usually for people that are more further on in their careers. So as you get more experience, you know, at least a couple of years as an ecologist, you might start writing licenses as well. And by then you really would know your legislation anyway. Okay, and another key skill I think you should have is botany, and that's because all habitats are made up of plants. So if you're doing habitat mapping, you can't really do it if you don't know what plants you're looking at. You need it for preliminary ecological appraisal, because you're going around the site and mapping the habitats and making a list of all the species within the habitat. So for example, I can tell whether a grassland is calcareous or neutral or acid by the species that are present, and I can tell if it's species rich or species poor by the species present. I can tell whether it's damp or dry as well. So by doing a species list, it builds up a picture of what the habitat is, and without botany you can't really do that. And I think it's really important to learn your botany. And over the years, there's been various articles in various magazines about the lack of skill of students coming out of university in terms of botany. And, you know, the seniors are kind of lamenting the fact that people are coming out of university and can't do botany at all. So if you're really rubbish at botany, then I definitely recommend you do our beginners botany course. If you're okay at botany, we have a botany quiz that you can do, and if you take that and you pass it, then I'll say, okay, you're okay at botany. So just email me and I'll email it to you. You're okay at botany, but build on it, and maybe do the grass ID course, because obviously grasses are flowering plants as well, and it's really useful to be able to identify grasses as well. So if you're in a woodland as well, you need to be able to describe the woodland, the trees. So things like, you know, there's a bat roost in this oak tree. So some trees are more likely to have bat roosts in them, some species of tree. You know, things like ash dieback, you might be wanting to advise your clients on maybe felling the ash if it's starting to die back and things like that. So, you know, I've been watching a lot of ash dieback chopping at the moment. I don't know if you have, but a lot is going on because ash dieback is killing ash trees. And sometimes I think, well, hang on a minute, that's not even an ash. They're just cutting down the trees. So, you know, I think in the case of ash, it's so easy to identify that I really do think it's a bit shoddy if you're chopping down other trees that aren't ash. But you know, if you're a bat worker, for example, and you need to describe a woodland, you need to know if it's an oak woodland with hazel and holly understory, which is what we have down here in Devon, or is it an ash woodland with, you know, something else in the understory. So it's really important that you can identify trees. So botany includes flowers, trees and grasses. And also, if you're doing a preliminary ecological appraisal, you need to also describe the hedgerows and assess it for hedgerow regulations. And a species-rich hedge has to have 7 or more woody species in it. So these are the tree species. And you need to be able to identify those and assess whether the hedgerow is protected or not. So being able to do botany and, you know, tree ID is really useful for hedgerow assessment as well. So, yeah, so if you have never done botany before, I definitely recommend that you do our beginners botany course. We have an online course and a taught course. I think the taught course is nearly full though. But the online course you can do as well. We're releasing it in early May because I don't want people identifying stuff when there's no plants to identify. So you can book it and then you'll get the materials in May. So yeah, so botany is a really key skill, and a lot of people struggle with botany if they've never done it before, and it really is one of those things that consultancies really like to see people doing botany, and sometimes they'll actually have some plant samples at the interview and say, well, okay, you say you can do botany, identify these, you know, what's this? And I actually had a girl interviewed a few years ago, and she was sitting in my garden having the interview, and I said, okay, I'm just going to do a bit of botany with you. I said, what's the tree just above my head? And she said, I don't know, not really sure. Okay, well, what's that tree over there then? And she went, I don't really know. And I said, those are the 2 most common trees in Britain, ash and oak. you know, I think you need to be learning your trees. And then I looked on the grassland with her and I sort of said, okay, what's that species there? And she said, oh, that's a daisy. So it was a little white daisy, you know, so everybody knows that, common daisy. Okay, so I pointed to another plant and I said, what's that species? She said, oh, I don't know. And I said, it's a daisy, it just hasn't got a flower. So it's about learning it enough to be able to identify things when they aren't in flower, and even when they're dead. I mean, nettles and some of the cow parsley type plants you can identify when they're dead as well. So it's, you know, it takes a while to build that up, and it is something that's, you know, it's not easy. It's like learning a new language in a way. You need to, you know, take your time and build it up. And I usually say to people, during the summer when all the flowers are out, that's the time to look if you're a beginner, because you'll want to only identify things that have flowers, because that's the easiest way to identify a plant, and ignore everything else that isn't in flower until you get better at it. So yeah, so that's my kind of big piece of advice. Okay, so my next key skill is phase 1. There's also another system called UK HABS, which is similar to phase 1 but slightly different, but it's basically a mapping system. So phase 1 was developed back in the 1980s, and it helps you to map quickly a site. So when you go along to do your preliminary ecological appraisal, so your first visit to a site, the first thing you do is a phase 1 habitat map, and then you start looking at the habitats and seeing if there's likely to be protected species there. So phase 1 is a mapping system, and it's a particular way that you do it. There's a particular methodology, and it's recognised universally. It can then be transcribed onto GIS and maps in your reports and things like that. And it can be used as well to monitor change over time. So you can map a baseline, and then if they're doing some habitat creation or habitat management, you can see change over time by remapping it using phase 1. So it's a specific methodology that you use. For phase 1 though, you do need botany skills, because a lot of the habitats, well, 99% of the habitats, apart from things like walls and caravan parks and things like that, are full of plants, and it's the plants that tell you what the habitat is. So if you're standing amongst gorse and heather, you know you're on a heathland. If you're standing amongst I don't know, flag iris and hemlock water dropwort, you know you're in a wet place. So it's kind of the botany skills come into this, and this is where I think it's really important to make sure both of these are covered in your skills. And also you may need to then be able to do phase 1 on GIS as well. It depends on where you're working. I've not done GIS for my whole career, but I mean, it's a bit last century now. I think a lot of people are bringing GIS into consultancy now. But I just do a digital map on Microsoft Publisher. So I'll just draw little polygons and color them in and on top of a base map, and that looks really good, and it looks professional. So if you want to learn phase 1, we do have a phase 1 habitat mapping online course, and that's been done by about 70 people now, and they've all managed to come up with a phase 1 habitat map at the end of it. So you know, if you want to learn phase 1, it's not totally difficult. It's just you know, a method. The skill that you might need to actually do it properly is the botany and the mapping skills, obviously. But to learn how to do phase 1 is quite straightforward. And so we have a course in Hampshire in June on phase 1, which is the day before the PEA course. So if you wanted to do all 3 days, you can come to Hampshire for 3 days and do them together. So yeah, so I recommend that you learn phase 1. And then obviously, if we're dealing mainly with protected species, then we need to be able to identify and know about all the key protected species. And I'm not going to go into great details about this because that would be a whole nother evening really. And I will be covering this in some other webinars. But the key species that we're mostly concerned with in consultancy are bats, great crested newts, dormice, not if you're in Scotland though, badgers and reptiles, and also rare reptiles such as smooth snake and sand lizard, barn owls and otters. And for the protected species that aren't starred, you need a protected species license for that species to actually be able to do a survey. So this is where you need to know about these particular species. So I would say if you don't know anything about any of these protected species, then do our Surveying for Protected Species online course. And then once you've done that, you'll cover all of these main protected species. So you'll learn a bit about their ecology, how to survey for them, and the legislation relating to them. And then you can go into more detail by going on our ecology and surveying courses, which are specific. So we've got bat ecology and surveying, great crested newt ecology and surveying, dormouse ecology and surveying, etc. And in those you learn in detail about the ecology of the species, how to identify them, what habitat requirements they need, what mitigation you can put in place, what the legislation is, and the different survey techniques as well. And so, I mean, really, each of these species has their own specific survey techniques, and if you don't know how to do those, then that's where you need to start getting clued up, because you can't sort of say, oh yeah, I know how to survey for reptiles, and you think that all you have to do is walk around looking for reptiles, when actually we use a piece of equipment called a reptile mat, and we have a certain times of the year that we do it, certain times of the day that we do it, the length of time that you put the reptile tiles out for, and all of those things, and the things that we need to record, like temperatures and all that sort of thing. So all of those survey methodologies you need to know about as well. So if you don't know anything about any of these, I would say the top three are bats, great crested newts and dormice. If you're in Scotland, then maybe go for otters or badgers. And then the other species, depending on whether you've already got experience of these key three, the top three that are the top three there. If you've already got experience of those, then maybe go on to some of the others and learn about those. And really, as an ecologist, you would have a general grounding on things like, you know, tracks and signs, things to look for, the sort of habitat that might be present for these species, what their distribution is. So are you likely to come across those species in that particular location? And when you're doing your PEA, your preliminary ecological appraisal, you're actually going along and looking at the habitats and looking at the tracks and signs and any sort of feeding signs or anything like that. And you're just trying to work out which species you think are present so that you can go back and do further surveys with equipment. So protected species awareness, I think, is really important. And the more you know, the better an ecologist you become. And obviously you really need to know the basics at least. So Surveying for Protected Species online course is the one that I recommend to just kind of get you started, so you've got an awareness, so that if you are lucky enough to get an interview, you can have a conversation about, you know, how to do a bat survey or great crested newt survey, or where dormice live and what sort of habitat you're likely to find badgers in, and what things to look for and things like that. So you'll have a good overview and be able to have conversations about that at interview. So, and I just wanted to also mention that if you haven't found out that I actually wrote a book called How to Become an Ecological Consultant. It's in its 3rd edition now, so look out for this green cover. So this book is really designed for anyone that wants to get into ecological consultancy, and it tells you what to do, you know, how to prepare your CV, what skills and knowledge you need, how you can get that through volunteering, subcontracting, and getting jobs and things like that, and then it takes you right the way through to what to expect in your first few months and years of your job as an ecological consultant. So you can get it as a paperback from Amazon, or you can order it as a PDF on our website under online courses, and it's only about £8 or £9, and I think it's a really good read, and I think it's definitely worth getting that one. And you know, it's kind of it came from me being asked all the time, how do I become an ecological consultant? What do I need to do? And I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll write a book and you read the book, and if you've still got some questions, then get back to me. And usually they just go, okay, I know exactly what I need to do now. So I'm just going to ask if anyone's actually read my book. Has anyone read the book? And if so, can you tell us about it? Anybody out there who's read it?
I've bought it.
I've read it, Sue.
Okay, Claire, do you want to tell us about it?
Yes, it's just very, very down to earth. It's not woolly at all, and to be honest, it's just nicely written, and in the same ways you deliver your presentations, Sue, you don't mess around with oh, you'll be okay if you do this. No, it's almost sort of strict in, you must do this, you have to do this. And also the goal setting thing. I mean, we all talk about having lists of goals and things to do lists all the time, but we never actually do it. But actually now I've done it, and once you're on a pathway to somewhere, you just feel so much better about yourself. And it's motivating. So yes,
okay, great.
Go for it.
Yeah, so there is a section on goal setting, and it actually gives an example of goals that you can, like, if you want to become an ecological consultant and you're starting from, say, you've just come out of university and you haven't got any experience, and it just gives you some steps, some suggested steps to take you through the first 5 years to get you up to being a senior ecologist. And then you make your own plan according to what your skill set is when you start, because obviously there might be some things that you don't need to learn because you already know them. But was there anybody else that has read the book?
I just bought it in the recent past, so I've only read a little bit of it at the moment. So yeah, so far so good. It's fairly straightforward about where to go, you know, who to talk to and how to build networks, and kind of the skills you would need, you know, and about volunteering and all that type of thing. So it's not too scientific language to confuse anybody. At the beginning, I thought I might, you know, read this and train to become an ecological consultant, but yeah, I kind of got the picture. So it wasn't that one; it was the last edition. It had a different cover, but yeah, so far so good.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so I definitely recommend you read that if you haven't read it, because it's not a lot of money and you get an awful lot of information in there, so I definitely think it's worth getting that one. And then just finally, so this is quite a short talk, but we're going to do some discussions. I'm going to take some questions. The next webinar I'm going to be doing on the 6th of April, which is working towards your survey licenses. So again, it will be at 7 p.m. and it will be about, we've talked about survey licenses for bats and dormice and great crested newts and things like that. It's about how to work towards those licenses and how to get experience and what you need to have in place before you can get those licenses. And so it'll just sort of explain everything, really. So if you want to find out about that one, and it's the same webinar link that you use to get onto this one. So it's ecologytraining.co.uk/webinars/. So yeah, I might have to change that because we're getting a new website soon. So I might have to if you're not on our mailing list, you need to sign up to our mailing list. So I'm guessing that you probably all are on it, and that's how you heard about this webinar. But if you're not, perhaps if you could email me on ecologytraininguk@gmail.com. So that's ecologytraininguk@gmail.com, and just say, please put me on your mailing list, and then you'll hear about, you know, where I'm going to have the webinars on my new website. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing because that's the end of my PowerPoint. And I'm just going to ask if anyone's got any questions. So I'm going to have a quick look in chat, see if there's anything there. Oh, 22nd of April, does it? Oops. Okay. I probably didn't write it in my diary properly. Thank you for that. 22nd of April. Okay, so has anybody got any? Oh, so somebody's got, what are the benefits of being a CIEEM member? What level of membership would you recommend applying for? There's lots of different levels of membership. There's a graduate one, which you can go into if you're kind of studying or have just graduated. And then there's different, I think there's an associate one, and then it goes up to full member. And then you can also become a chartered environmentalist or a chartered ecologist as well. So the answer to that question is it depends on where you're at when you apply. So some people who've done a lot of environmental consultancy, for example, might go straight in as a full member because they already have a whole load of experience of environmental consultancy, and therefore they, you know, would qualify as a full member. I was actually lucky enough to, I think I became a full member about a year after I started consultancy, because I had done so many things before I started that I became a full member straight away, or more or less. So the answer to that is it depends on where you're at. So the benefits of being a member of CIEEM is that there's a big push for people to only recommend chartered members, so CIEEM members. So it's kind of peer reviewed. So when you do your application, it's quite a thorough application where you have to talk about some key skills that you have and how you demonstrate that you have those skills. And then you have to have a reference or two references, depending on which level you're going in at. And they have to vouch for you, basically. So it's like making sure that the person who says they can do something is verified by at least one or two people, so that we know that they're not just sort of saying, you know, pay your membership and you can put letters after your name. So it is peer reviewed. They also have a lot of good facilities, like they have they have a directory, so you can put yourself on there if you're available for work, or if you run a consultancy. They have an insurance scheme. They have all sorts of things they're getting involved in policy wise. They do really good conferences. They do quite regular conferences, actually. And they do some specialist training as well. So that's might be where you could get your GIS or bat sound analysis training in there. So does that answer your question? Hopefully it does.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, graduate is now replaced by qualifying membership. Okay, so that's, you know, somebody that qualifying. So I think qualifying only needs one signatory. And I'm willing to sign people off for that if I've worked with them a bit. So if you've done some courses with me, so for example, if you're doing certificate in ecological consultancy, which is our big course that we do, then I'm happy to be a referee for all of those. But if you've done quite a few courses and we've got to know you over the time, then I'm happy to be a reference for you if you want to. And yeah, the courses that they do have a cheaper price if you're a member as well. They also expect you to do 20 hours of CPD, which is continual professional development. And I think that's a really good thing, because it means that everybody who's registered is actually keeping up to date with things. And so you have to log that onto the website to let them know that you've done your CPD and that you're, you know, keeping up to date with everything, because things change all the time. And you know, I've been doing this for 18 years and they change all the time. It's just you just need to keep up to date with things, really. Okay, has anybody got any other questions? So what do you think about those key skills? Do you think those are things that, do you think there's anything missing from that anybody can think of? Okay, so do you want to do try your little reactions button at the bottom there, and just let me know if you have identified some skills tonight that you need to increase on or get. So has everybody got something that they definitely need to be working on? I'm guessing it's probably most of you, really, because that's why you're on the course on the call tonight. Yeah, so a lot of people. Okay, so it might be a good idea to just kind of write a few things down. Do you want me to go back to the talk and go back to those key skills so you can write some things down, or do you want to watch this again, because I am recording it and I will be putting it up so it can be seen again? Does anybody want to make any comments?
Thanks, Sue. It's been really useful. I've made quite a few notes as we've gone through, but it'll be great to perhaps have a look at the recording at a later time. We can kind of click through the bits that we need to check back at. But yeah, it's been, really, really great. Thanks ever so much.
Okay. So I haven't necessarily told you how to get these skills. I mean, apart from the fact that we do obviously do a lot of relevant training, and really my mission in life is to get as many people into this career as possible. And I literally spend my full-time waking hours helping people to get into ecological consultancy. So if you feel like you want some help in deciding which courses to prioritize, for example, or you know, where you might get experience or something like that, I did do a webinar last month on how to get experience, so do check out our YouTube channel where I've put them up there now. But also if you go to the webinar section of the website, you'll see the links to the previous webinars. So you might find that it's a good idea to you know, go through some of those with some of the advice I gave in there. So I haven't really sort of given detail on how to get this experience. Okay, so yeah, so maybe decide on what it is that you think that you should be focusing on. So I've got somebody here. Who's this? Harriet. I was thinking of doing your phase 1 habitat mapping, but my botany isn't fantastic. So would you wait until May and do the botany course first? It would certainly make phase 1 a lot easier if you can do some botany. Yeah. Because I find a lot of people that try phase 1 and don't know the different species of whatever that tell you what a habitat is really do struggle. So I think if your botany's poor, that should be a big priority for you. Yeah, and try and get out as much as possible. So once you've done beginner's botany, for example, so you can do it in May online. If you sign up for it now, we can send it off to you when it comes out, so that you don't miss out. And just go through the material, learn about all the different families, start getting used to using your book and using descriptions to look at your plants and plant shapes and flower shapes and all those sorts of features that you've probably never even noticed before. I know when people start doing botany, they sort of say, I've never even noticed the plants before. I've just sort of, you know, now I want to know what each one is, and I want to identify it, and I want to, you know, work out why it's there and why there's this particular community in that place and things like that. So the plants can tell you a lot actually about the soil conditions, about moisture and underlying geology and all sorts of things like that. So it's a fascinating subject, and I think if botany is your weak point, then I would definitely get that organised as soon as possible, because you know, you're going to struggle with phase 1 habitat mapping. Maybe because we've got phase 1 online, you can do that later on. So maybe you have a couple of months, so do your beginner's botany in early May, and then go through to say the end of June to practice a little bit, and then do your phase 1 then, so that you've got some botanical knowledge. It would make it a lot easier. Let's have a look and see if we've got any other questions. Yeah, so James is thinking about improving his bat knowledge, and I think that's a good idea, because bats really are a big thing in consultancy, and bats are pretty much everywhere in the country, and you come across them all the time. So I think sort of, obviously botany is really important. I wouldn't just focus on one thing, because if you want to learn about bats and you want to learn about botany, you can do that at the same time, because bats are in the evening and botany is during the day, if you like. And so there's lots of information in the bat ecology and surveying course about all the different things that bats get up to, how they breed, what they feed on, how they feed, and what they do during the year and during the day, and all of those things. And then also how to do the survey technique, so that if you then want to get bat experience, you can say, I've done a bat ecology and surveying course, I now want to get some experience, and you can offer yourself to local consultancies and actually start getting paid to do bat work. And if you want to start working towards your license, you need about 100 hours of bat survey experience. So that's about 50 surveys, because most surveys are about 2 hours. So start with the bat ecology and surveying course, so that you know what you're talking about, you know all the different species that are in the country, and you know a bit about each one, and then you can offer your services basically as a bat worker and start getting some experience that way. So yeah, good idea to work on your bats there, James. Kaylee says she bought the Collins Wildflower Guide, really helpful, just to page through it now in preparation for spring, and it's got lovely illustrations. So another thing is the FSC charts. So let me just grab some. So Field Studies Council does a whole load of charts, ID charts. So I'll just show you, like this one's the one on orchids, for example. So it's got all the orchids in Britain in here, and you can identify them. It's got descriptions on the back. It's got a little key actually on the back and things to look out for. So if you go to the Field Studies Council, and if you want to do botany, the 3 that I recommend are Grassland Plants 1 and Grassland Plants 2. So Grassland Plants 1 is neutral grassland, and Grassland Plants 2 is calcareous grassland. And sometimes we just need to take both of them out actually, and definitely get those. And then coming up now, we've got the sort of woodland plants and the ancient woodland indicators, like primroses and bluebells and wild garlic and all that lot. There is one called woodland plants as well, so get that one now, because the woodland plants are coming out. We've got lesser celandine and snowdrops and primroses and stuff out at the moment, and then in the summer get the Grassland Plants 1 and 2 for identifying grassland plants. Okay, so it's basically grassland plants that are in flower. Okay, so again, only try and identify things that are in flower. So those are really good. But then the Collins Wildflower Guide, there's also the one that I like is the Collins Pocket Guide, which is actually out of print at the moment, but you can get it secondhand, and it's got some really good little keys at the front of it. And Collins also do a photographic guide to wildflower identification, and that's got some little keys in it as well. So let's have a look at any other questions and things like that. So yeah, so do make some notes after this webinar on what you think you need to focus on, because obviously there's so much to learn, isn't there? And it might be I'm going to focus on botany and bats, or I'm going to focus on phase 1 and PEAs and report writing, or, you know, it depends on where you're at really, because some people have got no experience at all. Some people have Like I know there are people in this webinar that are really good at birds, for example, and so they're experts, but they might know nothing about botany, or they might know nothing about other protected species. So yeah, so think about what it is that you need to do, and if you need any help, just email me. Okay, so it's Ecology Training UK @gmail.com. So Harriet's also working on her tree ID. I think that's a good idea. It's not easy if you haven't done tree ID to do it at this time of the year. So I would wait until about June, because even in May, a lot of the trees still have quite stumpy little leaves. So for example, sweet chestnut has a leaf about, I don't know, 8, let's say in centimeters, about 15 centimeters long. But in May, it's still quite stumpy, and it can get confused with some of the oaks and things like that. So so wait until the trees are fully in leaf before you start learning your trees. But the best thing to do for learning trees is just collect the leaves and start a little collection and learn them like that. So Rachel's saying, as a recent BSc graduate, do you think doing a master's that covers basic EIAs, environmental legislation and GIS is worth spending the money on? Or would you recommend doing the courses you mentioned that are provided online, such as botany, habitat mapping, protected species surveys? So that master's sounds like it's environmental as opposed to ecological. So you'll be dealing with things like contaminated land and waste reduction and stuff like that, really. So if you want to go into environmental stuff, that's fine. But if you want to do ecological, in other words, wildlife, birds, plants, mammals and insects and things like that, then I would focus on the courses that I've said, because you can get in with those anyway. So we've got some people are going to work on their botany. Would you recommend purchasing your own bat detector, or do consultancies provide you with them? For professional surveys, they should provide you with the professional bat detectors, but it's always useful to have your own bat detector. If you can't afford a very expensive one, if you can afford, say, 60 to 70 pounds, then I would go for a magenta. So it's called it's just called a magenta. Make sure you get one with a digital readout of the frequency, and just go out and use that. If you've got a bit more cash, around £220, you can get a thing called an Ecometer Touch, which is something that you can plug into your phone or tablet, and it gives you a sonogram, and it even tells you what the species is most likely to be, and it's really, really good, really good. It also records as well. So let's see if anybody else has got any questions. I'm still plugging on with the ecological introductory course, definitely a lot to learn. Okay, so if you have no ecological background whatsoever and you want to get into ecology, then you need to do our introduction to ecology course. So I've got graduates like geography graduates, I've got environmentalists, I've got all sorts of people, arboriculturalists and all this sort of thing that really haven't had any formal training at all in ecology. So if I said to them, you know, what's a metapopulation, or what's you know, what do we mean by abiotic factors and biotic factors, would you know what that means? If you've got no ecological training, don't know all the jargon and stuff like that, then I would definitely do Introduction to Ecology. It's a 10-module course which you sign up to and get the modules every week, and that'll give you all the fundamentals. And once you've got that, you'll actually know all you need to know about ecology theory and, you know, all the principles, and it just makes everything else make sense. And I think, you know, if you want to be an ecologist and you haven't had any formal training at all, then that one is definitely worth doing, because you will be having conversations with colleagues and they'll soon find out that you haven't had any ecological training. So for example, I used to know a guy who's a really good ecologist actually. He wrote books on, you know, he was like one of the top ecologists. He's unfortunately died now, but I remember going to conferences with him, and he would just glaze over when we started talking about things like you know, cell structure and DNA and stuff like that, because he absolutely had no clue. And I said, oh, what was your training then? He said, oh, I did history of art. And I was like, oh, right. So you're one of the top ecological consultants and ecologists, of world renowned, if you like. And he never did any formal training and didn't really understand all the stuff. So, you know, you don't necessarily need a relevant degree, but if you put the effort in and you gather all the knowledge, you get there, you can be quite eminent, really. But just to say that this introduction to ecology is the one that really sort of makes sense of everything and makes you start to think like an ecologist. So Sylvain has just said, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, there's lots of Botany apps as well that you can get to help you with your ID. So what I would say with the apps is you take a photograph of the plant and it'll tell you the plant that it thinks it is. Don't ever take that to be true, okay? Because it's an aid, it's not definite, okay? So what you need to do then is look up that plant in your book and read the description of the plant, and if it matches, then fine, it's that plant. But you know, be careful of the apps is basically what I'm going to say. Okay, so I think we've gone through all the questions. Any other last comments or questions? Have you learned something this evening? You can use your little icon thingy if you want to. So yeah, so I look forward to working with you all at some point and helping you through this. Obviously, I've tried to create the training and courses that are relevant to getting into ecological consultancy. So if there's anything I can do to help you specifically, please just email me and let me know if you want some help choosing courses or which path to take. And keep watching these webinars. They're designed to get you on the path, really, and obviously I don't charge for them, so that's a good thing. You can get free information. And do have a look at the previous ones as well, because obviously I give a lot of sort of different angles to the information that you need to get into this in the different webinars. So just to remind you that the next one is working towards your survey licenses. So you've heard me talk about survey licenses, and I'm going to tell you how you do that. And then and I've already set a date of 22nd of April. I didn't realise I had set a date, so I set another date. But anyway, I shall have that up on the website. So the link for that one will be up in the next couple of days, because I didn't want people to accidentally join that one and not this one. So I shall put it up shortly. So thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope you found it useful, and yeah, get in touch if you need any help with anything. And thank you very much for joining me. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Sue. Bye.